I saw an opening, so to speak. You know, you're always looking for an opening with Swami. And I saw that opening and I got my head in the window. And there's Swami in the back and he's just glowing like with happiness. And it was like, wow, it was a different world. You just gotten into the magic world. And I was in there in the box with the magic world.
Sairam, dear listeners, welcome to Sai SOUL 100. Our guest today is Brother Phil Gosselin, who's joining us from Massachusetts. Sairam, Brother Phil, thank you for joining Sai SOUL 100.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Sairam, please share your story.
Okay. So I have a lot of stories. Swami was very generous with that. I think partially because I really, really wanted that, and then partially because he knew I would be in a position where I would be called upon to speak for a weekend. So I think he gave me enough stories to fill a weekend, you know, meaning 5 hours or so. And I've given a number of those interviews to Radio Sai in the past. Probably come upon it. There was a two-part interview with Tryst with Divinity, and then there was another one in, those were like in about 2012, and then in 2019, a further one. So that covered a lot. So I'm going to try today to do some stories which weren't covered there. I wanted to start out with, this is one because this is representing the people of Mid-Atlantic, not so Satwick, but perhaps amusing. I was just reading in the paper that the Aqueduct Raceway, and when I was a child, horse racing was a big thing. You know, everyone, you know, knew about that. And, you know, of course, people have gotten tired of that whole thing, and racetracks are disappearing. And I just read in the paper that they're finally closing the Aqueduct Raceway, which must have been a big thing for 100 years. The reason I mention it is that in spring of 1971, I was living in a house with a number of young Western men outside of Whitefield. And two of the men one night reported about their dream. And they were both native New Yorkers. And one had a dream about the Aqueduct Raceway on a particular date 3 months hence. You know, we're living in India, southern India, and we're dreaming about New York. Something very funny about that. The other fellow dreamt about a horse named Cosmic Ray. So they wrote back to New York and said, you know, find out if there's a horse running that day named Cosmic Ray. And there was. And they wrote back, bet everything on it. And sure enough, the horse won. And but the people in New York had forgotten all about it, and they didn't care, and they didn't bet on it. So no money sort of changed hands. But it was just an example of Swami's humor, you might say, playful humor, and saying, in a way, I'm part of your life. I'm a playful part of your life. So there was one time, for instance, that Swami was interested in building a planetarium. And so then there was very discussions with people about planetariums, and pretty much no one knew anything about planetariums. And then Swami pointed to this list of centers, and there was a center in New York called Planetarium Station. He said, ask those people, they must know, you know. And it was one that was right next to the American Museum of Natural History, and they had a planetarium there. So it was called Planetarium Station. So he uses everything about us, and he becomes part of our life in very, very little ways, and kind of subtle and amusing ways and endearing ways. I was also thinking about one, you know, those childhood rhymes, nursery rhymes. When the British were giving, in charge of the educational systems in India, they used to teach the children these English nursery rhymes. And Swami was taught on those, and he often spoke out against it. He said, this is ridiculous. Why are you why are we saying this kind of nonsense when we should be talking about Om as the very first letter of the the alphabet? But anyway, there was one that says, Baba Black Sheep, have you any wool? And so one time he came down the darshan line with us, and he looks at us and he says, yes, sir, 3 bags full. So, it was playful and sort of a zinging comment at the same time. So when Swami does things, he does numerous things at the same time. So I wanted to talk about that sort of electromagnetic force of Swami. He was just like the world's greatest electromagnet. When he turned on the juice, people would fly like iron filings, and they would fly across the globe to see him. And they had no idea sometimes why they were even going. It was just this force that was bigger than them. But within that, there were a lot of different incidents at darshan. Darshan was a time for electromagnetism. You would sort of see it, and you'd see people, they would often swell up, their chest would swell up like their heart was trying to get out to reach to him. Or they would try and reach over so many rows to extend themselves in ways that they never had. And he used to like that. He used to encourage that, in that he wanted people to put themselves out. In Whitefield in those days, like on Sunday or Thursday when they had bhajan, it would be a big crowd, and they would sometimes let you walk about 50 feet behind Swami because just they didn't have enough sevadal to sort of keep you in your place. And people would get up and sort of very slowly and beautifully drift across the sand, as being as close to the Swami as they could. And it was like God was leading us into some higher state of consciousness. It was sort of a metaphor. It was a moment and a metaphor at the same time. So there was very, very beautiful. And I also like to mention about one of my favorite darshans would be right after bhajan in the morning and puttaparthi. On the men's side, Swami would get up from his chair, he would go out, he would go into his little interview room, then he would go up the stairs, and he would walk across the upstairs veranda, and he would, by that time, he would be right over, all the men had come out of the back of the bhajan hall. Arti was just about finished, and Swami would be standing directly above us, looking directly down at us, like 10 feet away. And there was something very, very appropriate and compelling about Swami being right there over us, looking down on us, connecting with us. And after we had just given all of our devotions and loves to God, that God looks down on us, the world seemed very, very complete. And I often mention about the first darshan of the day would be after the Naga Sankirtan. In those days, they were a little bit earlier than they are now. And it would still be kind of darkish and in the gloaming. And everyone would gather in the sort of center courtyard in front of the mandir. And this happened every morning. And that each time in the exact same way. And each time everyone would sort of gasp in surprise. And what would happen is the door to his upstairs apartment would open. You'd see it open. It would be totally black. And then you would see, just coming out of the gloaming, you would just start to see his face appear, just enough like, do I really see him? And then, yes, I really see him. And then he would really just recede right into the black. And the metaphor, and when you could first see him, the whole crowd would gasp because there was something so intense and compelling about it. And of course, it's a metaphor for seeing God. Do we see God? Do we look closely? Are we aware? Are we on the lookout? And does God sort of lean in to just show us a little bit, just for a moment? And that's why we have to be on looking at every moment, being aware of the Baba. I also wanted to mention about a couple of darshans. One, I had the opportunity to fly with Swami one time. And in those days, there was no security on planes. You could just call up and find out if Baba was flying on a certain plane. And they'd say, oh, yes, Mr. SS Baba is flying, Thursday at 2. And I'd say, okay, buy a ticket. And so we flew once with him to Bombay, and it was just heavenly. He didn't get up and walk around like he did sometimes, but the idea that you were with him and, there would be plane turbulence and, you always wonder, well, plane turbulence, is there something bad going to happen? This time you knew there was nothing bad going to happen. And everyone was very, very elevated in more ways than one. And there was also a time, later years, we're now talking, I don't know, 2000 or so, when Swami was not walking very much, and he would just be in this car, in this tiny car. And this car would navigate its way across the veranda, which was like almost impossible. And it would navigate its way across the front of the veranda, which is even more incredible. And so the driver was one of his students and attendants, and just incredible, compelling concentration. And one time the car stopped right in front of me at last. And this fellow had this big project, his big, I don't know, it was diorama or something, and he was lifting it into the car to show Swami. And there was just one window open, and it was in the front, and Swami was in the back. This fellow was in the window, and I saw an opening, so to speak. You're always looking for an opening with Swami. And I saw that opening, and I got my head in the window. And there's the driver, not moving. All this wild stuff's happening all around him. And he has in this impossible situation, and he keeps his concentration. And meanwhile, we're inside the metal box of the car. And, Swami is sort of like a king with all of these thousands of people around. But now we're inside the box. And there's Swami in the back, and he's just glowing like with happiness. And it was like, wow, it was a different world. You just gotten into the magic world. And I was in there in the box with the magic world. So those were some darshans that I remember and that were particularly compelling for me. There was another one, which in those days was very casual, 71, about getting into the men's bhajan hall. You could walk in at the last moment and, whatever. So one time I was right there, and I came in sort of right at the last possible moment, and I'm just sort of inside the doorway of the bhajan hall in the back of the men's side. And Swami comes out, but instead of going to his chair, he goes to the back. And he's standing right behind me, and he's so close behind me. And I see all the people looking at him. And you're right there, and you're right almost in the line of fire of all of that devotion that's coming to him. And he was so close, I could feel his toes behind me. And everyone could see him, but I couldn't see him. I couldn't get around to see him. So it was sort of a metaphor in a way. You had to sort of enjoy everyone else's darshan. But I decided that maybe there was one way I could see him. That if I turned my head all the way back and looked all the way back, I could see him. So I thought, well, maybe that's not kosher, but here's my chance, and why not? So I turned my head all the way back to look at him straight up. And he looked down at me so fiercely that I immediately put my head back up. I realized, oh, that's why you don't do that. And but people said afterwards, he gave a big smile. Like there was a rule for everything and an exception for everything in Swami's world. It's because grace was the sort of connector. He wanted everything to be really pucka and careful, but at the same time, he wanted the love took precedence, and there were exceptions for all kinds of things. So we're talking about the darshan power of Sai, but there was this the Spartian side of Swami, which the touch of Swami. And I saw that in action a couple of times with my kids. One time was with my son, and he was just a baby, and we were called for an interview, and we had to wait for a long, long time. And there was even different sets of interviewees before us. And he was very well behaved, but after an hour or two, he's getting kind of fidgety, and you really can't feed him there. And just as we're finally called in, he's just about ready to start crying. And Swami says to him, "Hey, Satya, be quiet." And his face was like this. He just fell out. He was like, it was out cold. Just the words from Swami, just out cold for the whole interview. So Swami could make those things happen. My daughter we also had a similar experience with her. And she was a kind of person who at that time was very large personality. And it was like a don't mess with me kind of personality. And she was obviously about to start to make a lot of squawking and get us thrown out. And at that moment, Swami looks at her and he gets very close and he slaps her across the face. and and you can see her sucking her air in like this is going to be one penetrating cry that's going to, shake the walls. And just as she did that, he reached over and he slapped the other side of her face. And you could, obviously it wasn't a painful kind of thing, but you could still see red and you could hear the kawak. And then she just sort of stopped. It was like, and the whole interview, she was like, just like that. She didn't say anything for the rest of the time. So he could do things. The touch of Sai was quite a thing. I also wanted to talk, in that case about Sambhashan. That's the hearing of Swami and Swami's talks. And with Swami's talks, they were intense. You could tell that the depth was there, but it was hard to get it. It was sort of like, as they say, drinking from a fire hose. I was there for a number of ones where he talked about things that you don't really see them in the books, but some of those little things were really the spice of life. They were really. One was there when he said that in the 2030s the world would come to unity, and that, of course, is very compelling, and everyone wants to wait and see what exactly that means, what that looks like. And I was also there when he told about meditation for the young adults. He basically said, you can't meditate. It's sort of like saying, let's get real here. All this talk about meditation, you can't meditate. You know it. I know it. Who's fooling whom here? He didn't say it exactly like that, but that was the general gist. He says, anyway, you can come to God. You can have God's darshan if you meditate one-pointedly for 11 seconds. I don't know why I said 11 seconds, but it was kind of a revelation. All the people, particularly in the young Westerners in my early days, it was very much about meditation was, sort of like you had a marathon slog. You had to keep going, and the longer and the more intense, the better. But Swami says, cut to the chase. Your job is to serve. Your job is to be in a lila with the divine Lord. It's not to impress someone else with your meditation prowess or whatever. And it's a very, very interesting one, but it basically also reinforces that God is close to us, very, very close to us. And that if we think about him or her with enough intensity, then God has to come. And when you get down to it, since we are God and we're talking to ourselves, and it's God flowing into God, God talking to God, that if we're clear, if we're not driving along like we have the foot on the accelerator and the foot on the brake at the same time, which makes a very herky-jerky kind of ride. But if we're clear exactly what we want, we're going to get it. Speaking about unity, that was a very big theme for me. I didn't get it for a long time, but the idea for me is unity Am I unified here at this moment? Am I unified with this machine? Am I unified here with the interviewer? Am I unified with myself? Am I unified with Babaji? And that's sort of the unity that it's not just a sort of a good idea like a UN kind of resolution or something. It has intensity and has meaning to it. I also remember the New York Times about 20 years ago had a big story on Swami on the second page, and it was called Satya Sai, A Friend to All, A Friend to the Whole World, I think was the title of it. And that's very much how it was. He was a friend to the whole world. The good, the bad, the ugly. He was a friend to all. It sort of led to a certain point, well, could I be a friend of God? After I sort of had to give up the idea, well, I'm going to be this grand meditator and I'm going to be this yogi who's going to unify with God, that doesn't seem too likely. So, but could I be a friend to God? And a friend to God seems much more doable, approachable, acceptable. I suppose the big question is Sai here now? And so Swami graces people with an awareness that Swami is here. And different people have obviously different stories of it and how it happened and whatever. And but this is the most important thing, to realize that Swami is here now, that there's no waiting until we die. There's no waiting until we are purified 8 lives from now. Swami is here, so we can partake of that or not, as we like. Swami once said there was something very compelling going on in my life, and he said he was going to do it, and then he didn't do it, and I had to reach and go to the plane. And finally, I'm standing in the sun for several hours. And so I sent a message in, like, what should I do? And Swami sent back, he says, you can stay or go as you like, which people could take as an insult. But actually, it's the God's message to us. If you want to be with God, be with God. If you don't want to be with God, don't be with God. No, there's no pressure. There's no pressure other than from ourselves, from our own desire. Swami says, the quickest way to reach him was learn to love my uncertainty. And we're not so keen on that. But really, it means love everything, love the whole thing. And Swami would, as part of his hooking us, was seemed to be offering different things, or we were imagining he would grant certain things. But as Swami says, Swami never disappoints. But he wants us to ask for the big. He wants us to ask for the grand prize. He wants us to ask for everything, the being God. And at that point, thank you very much. Jai Sairam. I hope everyone is full of bliss and happy with God. Thank you for Prabha, and thank you for everyone. Jai Sairam.
Sairam, Brother Phil, thank you so much for sharing your stories. Sure. Beginning your journey in 1971, which is many years ago. Your journey has been long and precious, and you have touched upon Swami being an electromagnetic force where everybody is fully attracted to him. And Swami is encouraging that and wants that, because that's how we get transformed. And then you also touched upon things that are not the most commonly shared experiences with Swami. Of course, interacting with your children. I'm sure there are much more interactions that Swami has had, but these are unique ones that is only understood between the child and Swami. And then of course, I just love the fact that you mentioned Swami is friend to the whole world, good, the bad, and the ugly. And we tend to pick and choose. And when things are going well, we would say, Swami's on my side, he's guiding me, he's with me. But sometimes when things are not going well, or we encounter people or situations that's not the best, we tend to sometimes question and forget that that's also Swami's doing. So there's a lot of growth for us, and listening to your story and all the stories of Sai Soul brings forth how Swami interacts with everybody in a very, very unique way. So
Okay.
thank you, Brother Phil, for being here and sharing your story.
Very nice. Thank you very much. Om Sairam.
Thank you, Sairam.
Sairam.
Sairam, dear listeners, thank you for listening to Sai Soul 100 with Brother Phil Gosselin. I'm Prabha Swaminathan. Until next time, Jai Sairam.